is a story of a person who lived not just as a physician or doctor, not just as a scientist, but he lived as a symbol, and that symbol still guides the path of medicine that we desperately perhaps need today. So his name was Norman Bethune, Henry Norman Bethune. He did not begin as a great person, nor was he a saint when he was born. He was like many of us. He was restless, he was making mistakes, searching for the truth. He grew up in the northern part of Canada, which is very cold. But somewhere inside his heart, there was a fire in him very early in his life. His grandfather was a doctor, and he wrote later in his books that, in his articles, that he was inspired by his grandfather to take up medicine as a career. But it was not just as a business or as a profession that he took up medicine. He said that medicine was a calling to him. It was not just a vocation. So from his very early days, the main point was that he refused to accept the world as it was. He asked many kinds of questions. Some of these questions are difficult, uncomfortable, but the questions are necessary. The questions are not very strange. These are the questions that maybe you ask and I ask, we ask today. He asked what should be the purpose of a doctor. He asked the simple question, who is my patient? The patient who is sitting in front of me, is he or she just a person, or is he or she a product of the society around them? These are the questions that Bethune asked. Very few of us, most of us know Bethune as a social physician, but very few of us know the other side of Norman Bethune. What was this other side? Bethune was a brilliant inventor and a researcher. He invented more than a dozen surgical instruments, the most famous being the Bethune rib shears. The Bethune rib shears is used during thoracic surgery even today across the world. Apart from that, he also invented many surgical techniques which are there in the medical and surgical journals of that time. But the important thing that we must remember is that his scientific journey had a decisive turning point. During his travels through Europe, when he was searching for ideas, looking for mentors, when he was searching for truth, he met the legendary physiologist Ivan Pavlov. It was in Pavlov's laboratory in Russia, at that time USSR, he witnessed something unique and extraordinary. Pavlov was conducting his research on conditioned reflexes, but there Bethune did not see just those experiments. He later said that it was Pavlov who taught him the greatest lesson of his life. What was that lesson? That lesson was that science must serve humanity. This was the single sentence, that science must serve humanity. This single sentence shaped the destiny of Norman Bethune. He returned to Canada not just as a medical technician, scientist or a doctor, but he returned as a thinker. He was convinced that scientific brilliance without social responsibility is meaningless. In 1926, he was afflicted with tuberculosis. In those days, tuberculosis was a devastating disease. It was a disease that devastated millions across the world. You see, in 1926, there were no drugs for TB. So basically, tuberculosis meant death sentence. If somehow the person would survive, then it was over to nature. Medical science had not much role. So Bethune was dying. He was abandoned. He was forgotten, but he fought back. What did he do? He volunteered himself for a radical surgery. That surgery had never been attempted on a human being before. The name of the surgery was artificial pneumothorax. He convinced the surgeon who had just described it, that surgery had been performed, I think, on animals. He convinced the surgeon to perform the surgery on him. And he survived. The experience changed him forever. He survived and he got cured. He told his colleagues that I know what a patient feels when he cannot afford treatment. I know what is the feeling of fear. I know what it means to be helpless. It was from this suffering that his path-breaking research on tuberculosis emerged. He wanted to find out the real cause of TB, to understand the poor man's tuberculosis and the rich man's tuberculosis, how the poor man dies and the rich man survives. And it is at this point that Bethune began speaking boldly about socialized medicine. What is socialized medicine according to Bethune? It is a system of medicine, healthcare, where healthcare is a right, it is not a privilege. And it was for these ideas that he was called a radical among the physician community, among the doctors community. In 1936, fascism rose across Europe. It was in the Spanish Civil War that bombs were falling, villages were destroyed, entire cities and towns were being burnt. Bethune could have stayed in the safety of his Canadian hospital. He could have published papers. He could have collected awards, lived a comfortable life. But he said that when the world is suffering, if I remain neutral, then it is a crime. He went to Spain. In Spain, he invented the world's first modern blood transfusion unit, mobile blood transfusion unit. He converted ambulances into blood banks, saving tens of thousands of lives on the battlefield. This was not just a simple medical innovation. It was an amalgamation of science with humanitarian solidarity. This was what a physician ought to do, refusing to allow language, nationality, religion, geography, caste, creed, everything decide the value of a human life. And from Spain, he traveled to another front line, the mountains of northern China. There, peasants, farmers, workers were fighting a brutal war against invasion, starvation. He performed hundreds of surgeries in mud huts, broken houses, operated without gloves when the supplies ran out. He taught villagers how to sterilize instruments. He mobilized community health workers who were illiterate long before the concept of primary health care even existed. The great Chinese leader Mao Zedong later wrote in his famous essay, he wrote an essay in memory of Norman Bethune. He described Bethune as a man who had no thought of himself, only of others. He died in China in 1939 from septicemia, infection of the blood, while he was operating. He died as a doctor in the fullest, purest sense of the word, as a physician. The topic that has been given to me today is scalpel, solidarity, and society. The scalpel is such a simple instrument, but in Bethune's hands, it became the most powerful symbol. He used it not just to cut through the organ or the tissue or the cell. He used it to cut through fear, to cut through inequality, and to cut across injustice. I think so many medical students are here, so many doctors, friends are there. Let us think of his journey once, from the TB wards of Montreal in Canada to the battlefields of Spanish Civil War, to the mountains of China alongside peasants, guerrillas, and barefoot soldiers. Wherever suffering existed, Bethune's scalpel followed there. He invented the rib shears we have discussed. He invented the mobile blood transfusion service. He wrote research papers in the night after performing 70 to 80 operations in a day. A surgeon's hand can save a life, but Bethune's hand, it shook the conscience of the then world. What do we mean what do we understand when we speak of solidarity? A very easy to pronounce word, but very hard to practice. You see, when we say of solidarity, solidarity means to say to someone that your suffering is my suffering, your struggle is my struggle, and your liberation is linked to my liberation. Bethune lived this truth with his life. Not just lived, he lived it with a burning intensity. When fascism destroyed, he said, if fascism destroys Spain, it will destroy the world, I must go. When the people of China were trampled by the armies, he said, if their freedom is robbed, if their freedom is destroyed, that means my freedom is wounded. I must go. And that is why he crossed the oceans without hesitation. He crossed languages, he crossed cultures, he crossed borders. He crossed the boundaries of what a doctor is supposed to do. Why? What was the reason behind it? Because Norman Bethune believed that a doctor's first responsibility is not just limited to a hospital, not just limited to a department, not even just limited to a state or a region, and perhaps not just even limited to a country, but to humanity, to society as a whole. Can you just imagine this? A man from far away Canada, in a tiny village in Yan'an in China, operating under a dim lantern light, eating whatever the villagers ate, sleeping wherever they slept, never asking for comfort or privilege, and becoming one of them. And he belonged to them. The Chinese villagers gave him the name Pai Chi Wen. Pai Chi Wen in Chinese means one who comes to help the people. His body died, but his solidarity made him immortal. I think Bethune understood in those days what many doctors, many of us doctors, including myself, we failed to grasp. That disease does not begin in the cell or tissue, it begins in the society. Tuberculosis grows in a poor housing complex. Cholera grows where sanitation is absent. Malnutrition grows where inequality grows. Mental illnesses grow in isolation. Liver diseases grow in addiction. And therefore, a prescription, a simple prescription of medicine cannot fix a social wound. A surgery cannot repair injustice. And therefore, Bethune saw that the real disease was not only TB, not only the wounds in the battle, not just infection. The real disease was poverty, exploitation, hunger, unemployment, and inequality. Why do these arise? Who creates this? Who benefits from this? And will our society, will human society always be like this? I think these are the questions that we must ask today. Because Bethune said that medicine is there, medicine exists not only to cure the disease, medicine exists to change the conditions that create the disease. And in this very sentence of Norman Bethune, that the role of medicine is to change the conditions that create disease, this should be printed above every medical college gate in India. I think social medicine is not just an ideology. Social medicine is the scientific truth about how disease is created. It is a moral truth about how health is being stolen. And I think it is the revolutionary truth about what physicians and doctors must fight for in today's world. Why does Bethune matter today? Because we live in a world where healthcare is becoming a commodity. Patients are drowning in expenses. Clinical medicine has become mechanical. Empathy is lost. Commercialization and corporatization of health is the order of the day. And young doctors are pressurized to produce revenue instead of caring for patients. Therefore, in such a world, Bethune is not just a historical figure. Bethune is not just a figure of 1930s. I think Bethune is a lighthouse. He reminds us that the doctor is not a mere technician. He reminds us that the physician is not just a mere dispenser of drugs, but a physician is a defender of human dignity. What is clinical skill? Clinical skill is not just inspection, palpation, percussion. Bethune reminds us that courage is a clinical skill, compassion is a clinical skill, solidarity is a clinical skill, ethics is a clinical skill. And the greatest instrument in medicine in today's world is not the rib shear that Bethune invented, not the scalpel, not the stethoscope. It is the conscience, the human conscience. We as doctors, we did not come to medicine to write mere prescriptions. We came to this profession because in our hearts we believed that our life must matter to someone else's life. And that is where I think Bethune is relevant. Bethune teaches us to be scientifically brilliant and socially aware at the same time. Bethune teaches us to be compassionate and to be courageous at the same time. If something is wrong, I have to say it. If something is unjust, I have to challenge it. If someone is suffering, I have to stand by him or her. We have to see the patient, not just the disease. We have to see the story behind the patient, not just the symptoms. We have to know why our patient is poor, why the village in which he or she is living has no sanitation, and why the system is failing the patient. These are the things that I think on this day, this week of the death anniversary of Bethune, we must remember, we must ask ourselves. This very image comes to my mind. There is a book called The Scalpel, the Sword. I request everyone, all the medical students here, young doctors and others, to please read the book. It is a night in a small Chinese village. A battle has just ended. The wounded soldiers are there in the rows. Inside a small mud hut, there is an oil lantern, flickering oil lantern. Bethune bends over a patient. His hands are steady. His eyes are burning with focus. His coat, his apron is soaked with blood red. Outside, the villagers are waiting. The other soldiers are waiting. Someone is whispering a prayer. Someone is crying. Someone is watching. As the scalpel of Norman Bethune tries to do the surgery, Bethune says, "I am with you. We will fight this together. You are not alone." This is not just medicine. This is love. Because a real physician is guided by the greatest feelings of love for the people. Therefore, I think I would like to request my young colleagues, we cannot all go to battlefields. We cannot all create new surgical instruments. We cannot all cross continents, but we can all carry Bethune's flame inside us. Every time we hold a patient's hand, every time we stand by the weak, and every time we question those in power, every time we choose conscience over convenience, Bethune will live in us again. The scalpel may be small, the resources may be limited, and the circumstances in present times may be difficult. But I think with our hearts, with our courage, our solidarity, and our compassion, we can change the system. I think that would be the greatest tribute to Norman Bethune.